Morning, folks. Welcome to the Sunday Politics. 5 Tory candidates square up to become the next Prime Minister after a leave vote in the referendum. But could a Remainer take the crown?
Mr Corbyn, surely you can stop and spare 30 seconds to talk to the media. This is embarrassing.
He's lost a vote of no confidence and most of his shadow cabinet, but Jeremy Corbyn's still there. When will one of his rebellious MPs make a move against him?
In London, another Heathrow delay, but the man who recommended expansion says he hopes the new Prime Minister will act in the national interest.
And with me, 3 political journalists, key lieutenants who've pledged unflinching loyalty to me and the programme. So I'm expecting them to jump ship to ITV for Pestons Croissants any moment. Helen Lewis, Tom Newton-Dunn and Isabel Oakeshott. So, after a brutal week in the Tory party, the leadership candidates are all out making their pitch for the top job in British politics. Conservative MPs get to whittle a short list of 5 down to 2 who will then face a ballot of the party's wider membership. This is what we've heard from them so far this morning.
We need to seize the opportunity. It's not just about leaving the EU, but it's about giving certainty to businesses. It's about saying to the world, we're open for business. Let's get some free trade agreements started as soon as we can. It's about saying to young people, we're sorting out the issues around competition from EU migrants for your jobs. You know, businesses need to upskill British workers. So we just need to get on with it. We need to get a grip and make progress.
We need to establish our own negotiating position. Of course, once we hit Article 50, once we invoke that, the process at the EU level starts. They say that that could take up to 2 years. What's important for us, though, is that we get the right deal. And that's a deal which is about controlling free movement, but it's also about ensuring that we've got the best deal possible in trade in goods and services.
I didn't want to be in this position, and if I'd wanted to be leader, if my sole ambition was place and position, if I just wanted the glory in the job, then I would have declared my candidacy last week when so many friends were urging me to do so. But I put my own personal ambition to one side and did what I thought was right for the country. And now I'm entering this race because I think the next leader of the country needs to be someone who believes heart and soul that Britain should be outside the European Union.
We're all committed now to taking Britain out of the European Union. We all stood on a manifesto, all Conservative MPs, to hold a referendum and to abide by the outcome of that referendum. So we all share a commitment to taking Britain out of the EU. That's what builds trust, and I think what really builds trust with members and with the country at large is showing now that we've got a clear idea for how we're going to do it and what our principles will be that will guide the negotiated exit.
4 of those who would be our next Prime Minister. We'll be talking to Liam Fox in a moment. He's the 5th, but let's go to the panel. Isabel, how about I sum up this morning and see if you agree or not? Theresa May consolidated her front-runner status. Andrea Leadsom performed in a way that suggested she wasn't quite ready for prime time, and Michael Gove cannot escape the manner in which he has become a candidate.
I think that's fair. I mean, I think certainly in relation to Michael Gove, what we've seen this morning is him desperately trying to persuade the nation that the way he behaved was reasonable and had nothing to do with his personal ambition. I think the big question is not whether it was reasonable or to do with his personal ambition, but whether it was actually an honourable way to behave. And I think most of us who know Michael would have thought up until now that he is an honourable person, a man of principle, but he can't get away from the fact of the manner in which he did it at the last possible moment, which was guaranteed to create a very, very ugly situation for Boris Johnson.
And this morning, instead of wanting to try and talk about his vision for Britain, what he would do if he was Prime Minister and so on, again and again he had to come back and defend his behaviour over last weekend and in through the week.
Absolutely. So he is now, whether he likes it or not, the Ed Miliband of the Conservative Party. That is absolutely the narrative put across him. Ed Miliband killed his brother David, he killed his brother-in-arms, Boris Johnson, and Michael Gove's great problem, I think, and he is an interesting candidate for this election. Very different to Theresa May, the radical, the huge sort of explosive entry into politics, the big shake-up the country needs to get out of the European Union, but he has got dead bodies piling up in mounds behind him. David Cameron, the European Union, quite a big body, and now Boris Johnson. And
even George Osborne, who was his friend.
George Osborne, who's
I mean,
Aberdeen
Aberdeen Grammar School boy gets hat-trick of Bullingdon boys, takes all three out. Cameron,
it's an extraordinary
Johnson,
record. Whatever
Osborne.
you think of it, the man is extraordinary, what he's done. But I don't see how on earth he can move away from that and park that in the next
But
2
it
weeks.
may not help him,
But
Helen.
the person who's got to be worried, really worried now, is Andrea Leadsom, because she is prime target number one. Whatever you think about Michael Gove's eventual chances of success, the one thing he has proved is that he's exceptionally good at taking people's legs out from underneath them. And Andrea Leadsom and he are competing for the crown of the true Leave champion. That is Michael Gove's pitch, if it's not about all the people he's knifed along the way. And so she has got to be target number one for him.
And she got into a little bit of trouble this morning on tax returns.
Well, I mean, there have been a rumbling issue with Andrea Leadsom and offshore trusts, and, you know, this is something that's not new. There's also this question mark over what she may or may not have said a couple of years ago about whether she really thinks that Brexit is a good idea. I disagree with the negative assessment of Andrea Leadsom. I think she's an extremely impressive person, and I think she does still have a good chance here because she can cast herself as a true Brexiteer who is undamaged like Michael Gove by the events of the last week.
But it would have to be her or Mr Gove, wouldn't it, as the true Brexiteer?
Don't underestimate the operation now to stop Mr Gove getting onto the last two.
There's a big stop Gove. There's all this talk that if Theresa May is such a front-runner in the MPs' elections, that in the end won't go to the country. Now, that may be a bit of a stretch, but let me put this to you, that if it's two Remainers, if it's, say, in the final two, Theresa May and Stephen Crabb, but Theresa May's way ahead, it may not go to the country. But if it's a Remainer, Mrs May, and a Brexiteer, Andrea Leadsom or Michael Gove, it has to go to the Tory party in the country.
And that is exactly the dynamic that's going to play out over the next 12 days amongst the Tories in the Commons. It's absolutely fantastic. See, what you've just done there, I'm afraid, Andrew, is committed the mistake that Stephen Crabb only this morning has said that everyone needs to move on from, which is the difference between Leavers and Remainers in the Tory party. Now, everybody is Brexiteers these days because of the referendum, but it serves the likes of Michael Gove and Andrea Leadsom extremely well to say, no, actually we're still two camps, we need one of us on the list. And if Tory MPs can move on quickly from the Great Divide, then we could easily see two Remainers and the Theresa coronation. If they can't, and the likes of you ask incredibly difficult questions like that, then I cannot see anything but Theresa May and Michael Gove or Andrea Leadsom on the final ticket, because the Tory Parliamentary Party will simply want that so for their members.
If you think Tory MPs are going to move on from the issue that has divided them for over a generation, I have a bridge to sell you.
I know. I mean, I wish that we would in a way, but I think Tom's exactly right, because the problem is that we voted for Brexit. We didn't vote for any particular form of Brexit. No. And I think that's what this will come down to, particularly the issue of freedom of movement. It will be what type of Brexit you're offering. And one side, the original Leavers, will probably end up offering a far stronger, full-fat version of Brexit than the other side.
Give me a name just for now. We won't hold it to you. Who's going to win?
Well, it looks like Theresa May.
Shall I just say Andrea Leadsom, just to be exciting? Just because otherwise it's boring if everyone says the same name all the time. Yes, I'm going to say it.
Boringly, Theresa May.
OK, 2-1. And you're just being contrarian.
I am.
We shall see. Long way to go. Now, Liam Fox is the only candidate to have stood for the Tory leadership before. Here he is, launching his bid on Thursday.
If we are to heal the divisions created by the referendum, we must fully implement the instruction given to us by the British people. So let me be clear. I do not believe there is room for membership of the single market if it entails free movement of people. Those who voted to leave the EU would regard it as a betrayal, and frankly, they would be right.
Liam Fox, he joins me now. Welcome back to the Sunday Politics. Now, everybody thinks that you're going to come fifth on Tuesday. You'll be the first to be knocked out. So why are you standing?
Well, we'll see what the result is, and if you remember back to 2005, they were all wrong then. But let's leave that aside on the arithmetic. The reason that I'm in this race is because I think we need to take the argument on now from the referendum to how we actually take Britain out of the European Union, but we also have to look at a whole range of other issues. We're not in this leadership race electing a leader of the opposition, which is what we've always done before. Someone doesn't have 4 years to play themselves in. And the day after this election, someone's going to get a call from Mr. Putin, and they're going to have to make an assessment on our nuclear deterrence. It's a lot more than just a rerun of the European arguments, and I think we have to get this into perspective. It's not a parlour game we're playing here. It's not an extension of the European Union. This is about the head of government having to take serious decisions in a dangerous world.
Let me come on to a bit of that in a minute, but ask you first of all, how many Tory MPs are backing you?
Well, I'm not saying because, and I didn't say last time either, because it only helps everybody else. And tactically it makes sense to keep your powder dry till after that first.
In double figures yet?
Oh, yes, well.
Well, but still fifth.
Well, I don't know what the other numbers are going to be. This is rather different, I think, from the previous campaign that I stood in, because in that one, by this point, 2 days from the first poll, most people had committed. There are a very large number of uncommitted people in this particular race, and I think, therefore, the most important event is going to be the party hustings tomorrow night.
There are 3 leavers running. What do you bring to the contest that Andrea Leadsom and Michael Gove don't?
Well, I've been in the Foreign Office. I understand a bit how that European mechanics actually operates, and I think that we're now seeing quite clearly something of the road ahead. People have been saying, what will we do? How do you set the ground rules before you trigger Article 50? I think what we've seen this week is a differentiation between the position of the Commission, which is hardline and ideological, and a rather softer approach from our elected colleagues across the European Union. For example, on Newsnight the other night, the European Trade Commissioner said that we couldn't possibly have any negotiations on trade with Britain until we were outside the EU. And she was asked, wouldn't that be detrimental to every single economy on Europe? And she said, yes, it would be. Now, that's a crazy position to have, and it tells you how stupid the approach of the Commission is. So what do? We have to talk to our German and French colleagues in particular who've got elections next year. And we have to say to them, let's start talking about what would be in our mutual interests. And
this is before you trigger Article 50?
Yes, of course it is. And you start to say to them, what sort of flexibility do you think we have? What can we do in our mutual interest? Because you've got elections next year. And you want to be able to sell to the German people and the French people a picture of how you can maintain their prosperity.
At the moment, they're saying they won't talk to us, not even informal talks. It is certainly true that Mrs. Merkel is sounding a bit more friendly than the Commission or even President Hollande. But at the moment, it is no formal talks. So you must expect that position to change.
I do expect it to change, and I think that when we have a new Prime Minister in place, it's for us to say, we are clearly going to implement the view of the British people. I don't personally think you can have a deal that includes anything to do with free movement. I think that was rejected by the public. But then we have to say to our European partners, this is what we're going to do, this is a position we're going to have. How can we do that in a way that doesn't cause you greater inconvenience than is necessary?
Well, it'll have to be a trade-off, will it not? It'll be a trade-off between an element of free movement, but less than we have at the moment, and a certain access to the single market, but less than we have at the moment. Isn't that right?
Well, whether you have, for example, quotas or in terms of job visas that you're going to give, that's something. But what we cannot have...
But let's just get that. If we had quotas for Europeans coming here, they undoubtedly will have quotas for us going there, won't they?
Well, it will have to be reciprocal.
Okay.
And this is
so we need a quota to go to France or Germany.
It's one of the things we have to understand. If we introduce restrictions on work permits, and in other words, settlement and work will be restricted but not travel, then we would have to expect there to be reciprocal moves in the other direction. I think it would be unreasonable to expect anything else.
Is it true that if Theresa May had promised to make you her Foreign Secretary, you wouldn't be running?
I wouldn't have accepted any promise. I think that anybody who makes you a promise in a race like this doesn't deserve to get to the top. And the reason for that is that the Prime...
But was it a matter for discussion?
No, it's not been a matter
between
for discussion.
Between your people and her people?
No.
Or...
No.
No?
I actually had discussions with Stephen Crabb. I've spoken to, obviously, Andrew's a friend of mine, and I've spoken to Theresa. But I would neither make nor accept any offer, because the point I was coming to was that any Prime Minister must keep themselves free from promises to bring in the cabinet that they require. And let's face it, with a very small parliamentary majority and a very big split in the party ideologically over what happened in the European Union, whoever wins is going to have to make a lot of compromises across a lot of the party if we're to have an effective government.
What's the more important quality for the next Prime Minister, to have been a Brexiteer or to have experience?
I think that they're both important in their own ways. To be a...
Which is the more important?
I think that in terms of foreign and security affairs, I think experience matters. And as I said, we're not electing a leader of the opposition. We are electing a prime minister. You can't play yourself in. It's not something you can just learn.
So a Remainer would be possible in you. It doesn't have to be a Brexiteer?
I think it's preferable to be a Brexiteer rather than a Remainer. The point you make is a very valid one. I think it's possible to be a Remainer, but I think I have to view it in this way, that I think the honest critique of this is that how do our European partners see it? If you were on the other side negotiating with Britain, would you be more likely to take seriously someone who had campaigned to leave the European Union or someone who chose to remain in the European Union? And I think that's the dynamic.
If you drop out, if you are out after Tuesday, who will you back?
Well, naturally, Andrew, you don't even expect me to answer a hypothetical question like that.
I do.
Well, of course you do.
Every question's been hypothetical on the basis of you being the next Prime Minister.
Hope springs eternal, but I think that I look at all the candidates, and all the candidates have their strengths. We all have our strengths, we all have our weaknesses in that.
So which one?
And if that were to happen, and I'm not expecting it to happen on Tuesday, then I would come to a decision sometime after that, and I'll make that known in the usual way.
You don't know yet?
If I know, I'm not going to tell you.
OK, that's clear. If Theresa May does emerge, or if someone else, but at the moment she's clearly the front runner, if they were to emerge from the parliamentary contest with a clear majority, overall majority among MPs, and polls suggesting a clear majority among the party faithful in the country, should it still go to the country?
Under our rules, it should still go to the country. And I think the parliamentary party, in the Conservative Party in the country, would expect there to be a contest. I think that might differ. If were there to be a huge and overall majority in Parliament for any one candidate, I think that members of Parliament would say, well, what would happen then if the parliamentary party had a different view from the party in the country? What would that mean for the authority of the Prime Minister? We would have to weigh that up. It is a hypothetical, but it is an important question we'll have to think about in the next 12 days.
Very well. A lot to happen in the next 12 days, because not much has happened in the past 12 days.
It's been a very quiet week, you know, in politics. We're hoping something might happen this week.
We keep our fingers crossed. Liam Fox, thank you. Now, as the Tories ascended into post-referendum turmoil, the standoff continues in the Labour Party, with rebellious MPs, that's the bulk of the parliamentary party, expressing no confidence in Jeremy Corbyn, but yet to put up a challenger against him. Mark Lebel's been following the twists and turns in Labour's agonising week.
What about Europe, Jeremy? What about Europe? Where were you when we needed you?
I think it may be, people may look back on this week as the week when the Labour Party committed suicide.
Oh, he's a good and decent man, but he is not a leader, and that is the problem. The Labour Party being ripped apart.
Be honest with yourself, can I do this job? He cannot do the job.
The day after Jeremy Corbyn sacked his shadow Foreign Secretary Hilary Benn, he received over 30 shadow cabinet and ministerial resignations ahead of this EU referendum debate.
Our country is divided, and the country will thank neither the benches in front of me nor those behind for indulging in internal factioning manoeuvring at this time.
Keep Corbyn, keep Corbyn.
In response, his supporters amassed outside Parliament.
Don't let those people who wish us ill divide us.
But inside Parliament, at a meeting with his party behind closed doors, on the eve of a no-confidence vote in his leadership, which he lost, his battle with his own colleagues worsened.
It was overwhelmingly dignified for most of the meeting, where people were pleading with Jeremy, saying, look, I like you, you've always been my friend, I've appreciated what you've tried to do, but this is tearing the Labour Party apart.
With 50 vacant positions to fill, Jeremy Corbyn reshuffled his pack in front of the media. He was visibly uncomfortable with the arrangement.
Can we do something later on, OK?
Yeah.
And between takes, a critic of his leadership, his deputy Tom Watson, had left the room.
I think that Seamus Milne, Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell and Diane Abbott, they have the mentality of people in a bunker. The whole of the rest of the world is against them. They are interested in the plight of people on Pacific Islands. They're interested in the Falklands, they're interested in a whole range of things like that. But they are not interested and have very little understanding of the processes of Westminster politics.
Well, if he wants to deal with...
On Wednesday, in the first PMQs since Brexit, the Prime Minister surprised many with this intervention.
For heaven's sake, man, go!
Well, the heavens have certainly opened on Jeremy Corbyn's parade. Following the Prime Minister there, Ed Miliband, once tipped to join his cabinet after the referendum, has now also called for him to go. I did find one fan of Jeremy Corbyn's, but not, sadly, of the BBC.
Anything to do with it. Go.
OK. Well, it's obviously a highly emotional subject, this, for Dennis Skinner too. On Thursday morning, it looked like a challenger to Jeremy Corbyn would emerge.
Are you going to stand for the leadership?
I'll be saying something later today.
Well, it's 2:35 here in Westminster this Thursday afternoon, and rumours are swirling around. We understand that 4 of Jeremy Corbyn's closest allies, 4 MPs he just recently put into his new shadow cabinet, have gone into his office and are trying to persuade him to resign. As it happened, they weren't invited in. Our source said the shadow cabinet ministers were left exasperated and frustrated, unable to deliver their suggested retirement plan for Mr. Corbyn to the man himself. And as the minutes ticked by, no challenge to Jeremy Corbyn's leadership emerged. It's Friday morning, we're at the Royal Festival Hall, and we're just about to hear a speech from Jeremy Corbyn's biggest ally, the Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell. He claims the shadow cabinet resignations have allowed a new generation of politicians to come forward.
This has given opportunities to people like Barry, who actually I think should have been in shadow cabinet years ago, but hasn't had the opportunity. And they're rising to the challenge really effectively, and I'm so proud of them. These are the heroes and heroines of our movement at the moment.
You talked about the movement rather than the party.
Oh yes, yeah.
Is that usurping traditional party structures?
No. The movement is the Labour Party, and we're building it on a mass basis now into a social movement. So it isn't just an electoral machine, it's something that engages in the wider community.
If the Labour Party is going to reconnect with people, it needs to do more than have sound bites and a polished media performance along the Blair sort of model. It actually needs to be building a social movement, and I think that Jeremy and John have really, they've started to do that. They've stood on picket lines alongside striking workers, they've joined mass marches.
With the threat of a leadership contest on the horizon, over the past week, Labour membership has risen by 60,000. But a new YouGov poll suggests Labour Party members think Jeremy Corbyn is not doing as well in his job as he was just 2 months ago. Aside from the focus on his own future, Jeremy Corbyn still has half a dozen key shadow frontbench posts to fill, so that Labour can offer effective opposition in Parliament.
I'm joined now by the Labour MP Barry Gardiner. He stayed loyal to Jeremy Corbyn and is now in the shadow cabinet. Welcome to the programme. How can Jeremy Corbyn be regarded as a credible leader of the opposition when he can't fill his shadow cabinet team and 80% of his fellow Labour MPs have no confidence in him?
Look, we have a very difficult situation in the Labour Party at the moment. We have a division between the Parliamentary Labour Party. The Parliamentary Labour Party has never actually supported Jeremy. Last year, I think it was only 36 nominations that he secured. I didn't nominate Jeremy. I didn't vote for him. But nonetheless, the way in which our party decides upon a leader is not just with the Parliamentary Labour Party, it is with the membership, the wider membership as well. And so what we have to do now is we now need to have a situation where we broker that divide. And we've seen, I think earlier today, we've seen that Jeremy himself wants to do that. He came out in the press this morning saying that. And also, I think the unions have been saying that as well. I think a figure like Francis O'Grady or perhaps John Prescott, somebody who stayed neutral, who stayed out of the fight, but ultimately has the best interest, not of Jeremy, not of the party, but of the country, which needs to have a strong opposition at the moment, at a time when you've seen the newspapers this morning, the Conservatives have their own problems. You've dealt with that, calling each other hypocrite. Boris stabbed David, Michael Gove stabbed Boris. But there are fundamental issues about housing. There are fundamental issues about investment in this country that we now need to be on the front foot.
But before you can even get to that or deserve a hearing on that, you have to sort things out, as you've been saying. We've got John Prescott on later in the programme. We'll see if he's willing to be the honest broker in this. But in your mind, what would be the general principle of a brokered agreement? What would be the compromise from Mr. Corbyn?
Well, look, I'm not sitting here in that position as the negotiator, but what I would say is there are certain things that need to be respected. The democracy of the party needs to be respected, and that's what I had against the way in which this whole, call it what you like, coup plot was done. It was done in a way that actually did not respect party members, did not respect party democracy. And whatever we end up as the result of a negotiation, it must show that respect for the party membership. The second, obviously, is the legacy that Jeremy feels is his responsibility. He was elected with on a particular mandate, with a political mandate, not just about party democratisation, but a suite of policies that he would want to be sure were continued.
Well, I mean,
somehow we need to make sure that the compromise, whatever it is, brings both of those together.
Well, I'm interested in what you say there, because you're already talking about Mr. Corbyn's legacy, and you're talking about a suite of policies that could continue to be party policy even if he wasn't there.
Well, look, we're talking about a negotiated settlement, right?
Which could involve Mr. Corbyn going.
Well, that's not a matter for me.
No, but it could from what you're saying.
Well, look, if you go into a negotiation, you're going to negotiate. And what we know is that one side of that negotiation wants Jeremy to leave now without a contest. The other side of that negotiation has very clearly said there isn't going to be a resignation, right? So what one has to do is to say, well, any of these permutations may come together. The question is in what form, in what shape. The coup, if I can call it that, tried to ensure that Jeremy simply threw up his hands and went. Now, that is clearly not going to happen. And therefore, what we have to do is we have to be able to provide a strong and credible and real opposition to the government at the moment, because the country is in crisis after Brexit. Absolute crisis. Not just the pound falling to a 35-year low, not just the stock markets, but the whole future negotiation of investment in this country is up for grabs.
And we
need to be saying that firmly in the House of Commons.
At a time when many people will think we most need it, we don't have a credible opposition.
And we don't have a credible government. They're squabbling like rats in sacks.
Well, that seems to be the default position of British politics at the moment, on all sides. But let me put this to you, that if you don't have a contest, Mr. Corbyn can't function as a credible opposition because he can't fill the shadow cabinet and the other positions. If you do have a contest and he wins in the country, that doesn't resolve things either. So neither of these two options really help you. Look, do they?
That may be true, but there may be a third way.
What is that?
Well,
it's the brokered agreement without Mr. Corbyn.
Well, there would have to be a third way. I don't know what it is. I'm not here to put that.
It's not Tony Blair, I assume.
It's something.
Since he was the third way.
Well, it's we've moved on somewhat since those days, and I'm a huge admirer of Tony Blair, and he led the Labour Party into government, and he won those elections for us and delivered a tremendous mandate. But that's not where we are now.
It was your use of the third way which just interested me, but I think you mean it in a different contest. If there is to be a contest, if one of the rebels does finally come forward as a challenger and you have a vote again, would you vote for Mr. Corbyn?
I didn't vote for Jeremy 9 months ago.
No.
I am not of the same political ilk as Jeremy, and he was not my choice as leader of the party. What I will do whenever a candidate, or if a candidate comes forward to challenge Jeremy, if Jeremy is part of that election, I will look at all of the candidates and I'll make my judgment at that time as to what best serves not only the interests of the Labour Party, but also what best serves the interests of the country.
How did you vote in the no confidence motion?
That was a secret ballot, and I'll keep it that way.
You're going to keep it that way. So you didn't vote for him before, you might not vote for him again, and you'll keep the no confidence ballot secret on that. Isn't there a systemic problem that's developed in the Labour Party with all the new members that came in from early last summer onwards, that they've invigorated your membership, but they may not be very representative of, they are certainly not representative of the parliamentary party, and they may not be representative of the wider Labour voter, never mind the wider electorate.
You know, the wonderful thing about political parties is if you look at most members of most political parties, they are a bit like anoraks. They're not desperately similar to ordinary people, and that's in both parties.
This is especially different.
You're asking a more subtle question, and that is, are we seeing entryism into the party? That's the real question that you're asking.
And there has been.
And there has been. And we know that. But where that has been proven, those people have been evicted from the party, and quite rightly so. I don't want people to join the Labour Party because they think either they can destabilise it in one way to the right or in one way to the left. I want people to join the Labour Party because they want to get out there, fight this rotten government, make sure that the real issues that people are facing in terms of their jobs and their livelihoods are tackled, and get out with me on the doorstep each weekend, knocking on doors, talking to people about that, not just coming in to exercise their vote once in a while when there's a leadership election.
Final question, which can be answered yes, no, or don't know. When we talk again at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool at the end of September, will Mr Corbyn still be your leader?
The answer is I don't know. I haven't got a crystal ball to see the result of whatever negotiations Jeremy now engages in.
All right. Barry Garner, thank you for being with us this morning. These are interesting times. Earlier, Len McCluskey, he's the General Secretary of the Unite Union, Labour's biggest donor, told Andrew Marr that Mr Corbyn wasn't going anywhere and that rebellious MPs seem to have been seduced by sinister forces.
Grandees being dragged out to be part of this unedifying coup is quite outrageous. I mean, the reality is that this has been a political lynching of a decent man, undermined, humiliated, attacked in order to push him out. And here's the truth. It's failed. The coup has failed. Jeremy Corbyn is made of stronger stuff. He's a man of steel, and he's made it clear that he will not step down.
And Chris Bryant, who resigned from the Shadow Cabinet last week, joins me now. Welcome back to the programme. Will there be a challenger to Mr Corbyn now for the leadership?
Well, I think there's a previous question. I'm sorry to tell you that there's a previous question, but it seems to me that actually there are millions of people out there in the country who would really like to be able to vote for the Labour Party. But whilst we have this unsustainable position, they feel it's impossible. And the unsustainability of it is frankly that we are a parliamentary democracy. So the first job of the leader of the Labour Party is to lead the parliamentary Labour Party and to provide an opposition. That requires 95 MPs on the front bench. And Jeremy can't get more than 20 or 25. And I think that simply means that the present situation is unsustainable. The only person who can break that logjam is Jeremy himself.
But the logjam in some way would be broken, or at least tested, if someone challenged him. So let me come to what is now the second question of your interview. Will somebody challenge him? Should someone challenge him?
Well, I don't want anybody to challenge him yet. I want Jeremy to read the writing on the wall, because what's happened over the last year, we've now had an opinion poll of Labour Party members which shows that 44% of them want him to go now and another 10% want him to go before the general election. We've had votes of no confidence, not only in the parliamentary party, that's more than 80% of MPs saying, this has never happened before, 80% of MPs saying that they have no confidence in his leadership. And that means he wouldn't be able to get on the ballot paper. I mean, there's a reason why the rule book says you've got to get a certain number of nominations from the parliamentary party, because if you haven't even got that much support, how can you really lead the Labour Party?
Even if you're the incumbent, wouldn't
even if you're the incumbent,
people people just watching this programme who may nothing to do with the Labour Party, may not be that political, would just think that if you're the leader of the party and you're challenged for that leadership, natural justice says you should be allowed to defend your position.
But if you then simply return to the status quo ante because you end up with exactly the same unsustainable position, then I don't think that resolves anything for the Labour Party.
That would be your
for the
democratic
country.
decision.
Well, except that, I think because we are a parliamentary democracy, the leader of the Labour Party has to be able to unite the parliamentary party and the membership and, frankly, be able to recruit voters to our cause. And I don't think Jeremy's able to do any of those three things. But what's interesting, I think, is amongst the membership, I don't think Jeremy would win a contest, if I'm honest now.
You don't?
I don't, because it was striking to me how many people have got in touch with me from my own local party saying, of course there are people who are ardent Corbynistas and they will be till their dying day, but there are others who've got in touch to say, I only joined the Labour Party to support Jeremy, but I'm sorry, this just can't go on. Jeremy's not convincing me, he's not convincing my neighbours, and they want him to go.
But of course, you may be right, but there's only one way you can put that to the test.
There's only one way.
And that is someone to challenge Mr. Corbyn, and let's see how the dominoes fall.
No, because I think that just gets us immediately back to the same position.
Oh, no, if he loses.
I think it will be phenomenally bruising within the Labour Party to have that contest. I think far more effective would be for Jeremy to read the writing on the wall, which is, I mean, it must be 8 metres high now. I mean, how can you possibly go forward with the situation as leader of the Labour Party when 7 of your new members of your shadow cabinet that you've only appointed this week, who are Corbyn supporters, want to come and see you, and you're so frightened that you can't even meet with them, or with the deputy leader of the Labour Party?
And indeed, I see the logic of that. But how long will you give him to read this writing on the wall?
Well, look, it's up to, in the end, it's up to Jeremy. Jeremy is, I think, a very decent man. I can't imagine any other leader of the Labour Party in our history, apart from perhaps Ramsay MacDonald, who would not have taken on board the result of a motion of no confidence.
But he seems to be surrounded by people who are telling him not to, and that he is hitting these people. I mean, we've had stories that he was thinking of standing down, but he was talked out of. We don't know the full veracity of all that. But if he doesn't, if he decides, no, I'm hanging on here, what do you do?
To be honest, once you're in the bunker, and you've got a bunker mentality, the game's up, is all I'd say. And I'm sure that in Jeremy's heart, he knows that there is a real danger that his broken leadership, because that is frankly what it is now, will break the Labour Party.
But listen, the Parliament goes into recess on the 21st of July. Just as the Tories haven't got much time to go through their leadership process, you haven't got much time. If he hangs on in there till the parliamentary recess, then he's there for the party conference.
Well, no, we've also got the September session. But look, I mean, I would just say, if Jeremy is listening, please, 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 Jeremy, you're the only person who can break this logjam. You could go out with dignity, and the whole of the Labour movement and the millions of people who'd love to vote for the Labour Party at a time when we've got a ghastly Tory government which might inflict even more harm through further austerity policies way into the next Parliament. If you were to go now, all those people would say you've done an immensely honourable thing. The Labour Party isn't going to go back to what it was 10 years ago.
Right. What do you make of Barry Gardner just talking there about a third way, about some kind of brokered arrangement, which I took to imply needn't necessarily include Mr. Corbyn continuing as leader?
It didn't sound to me as if Barry was very strongly supportive of Jeremy remaining as leader. Let me put it that way. And I think part of whatever happens now must be Jeremy going. But it's a bit of a problem if Jeremy won't even see the 7 people in his shadow cabinet that he appointed this week who want to talk to him about his departing with honour. Or if he won't even have a meeting with the deputy leader of the Labour Party, who incidentally also has a mandate from the members themselves. And my local members the other day, some of them of course want Jeremy to stay, whatever, but many of them were saying, look, this is now completely and utterly unsustainable. Jeremy must go, the party must treat him with decency so that we can move forward and take the fight to the Tories.
If he doesn't go, or if there is a contest and he wins again, that the party in the country put him back in, what happens to the Labour Party? What do people like you do?
Well, I mean, that would break the back of the Labour Party on, I would argue, the vanity of those surrounding Jeremy. And I think that that would be a terrible, terrible shame, because there are people in my constituency who will only get a decent chance in life, and for that matter, in many of the other parts of the country, who, after the Brexit vote last week, wanted the Labour Party to come up with a strong argument about how we could change this country for the better, and they will have nowhere to turn.
If you break the back of the party, that sounds like it's at least possible that Labour would split.
Look, as I've said several times, the truth is we are a parliamentary democracy. We were founded as a Labour Party because the trade unions started losing battles through the courts. They wanted to change the country.
Into Parliament.
Exactly, to change the law, and to do that you had to change the government. And that's what I still believe in. But if the leader of the Labour Party has to convince voters that we've got a compelling vision for the future of this country, and Jeremy is simply unable to do that. Many of Jeremy's policies I passionately support. I want us to change the whole language around public expenditure and the public sector, because there's the Rhondda, many other parts of the country feel completely neglected, and there are angry people there who want to vote Labour but are not convinced now.
Not doing it. As things stand at the moment, even with what you could call chaos in the governing party at the moment, you would need a major miracle to win in 2020.
I believe in miracles.
Very well. On that existential point.
And the most important miracle is that Jeremy can break the logjam.
Very well. You still don't want to hit Ed Miliband, though, do you? You've changed your mind on that.
I don't want to hit Ed Miliband. I wish we weren't, as a Labour Party, where we are, because I can do nothing for the Rhondda.
Peace has broken out on the Sunday politics.
May your God go with you.
It's coming up to 11:45. You're watching the Sunday Politics. We say goodbye to viewers in Scotland who leave us now for Sunday Politics Scotland. Coming up here in 20 minutes, I'll be talking to the former Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, John Prescott. First, though, the Sunday Politics, where you are.
Hello and welcome from us. This week we continue to try to fathom what Brexit will mean for the capital. And here was one thing that happened. A decision on Heathrow expansion put off again until at least the autumn. But the man who recommended expansion tells us he hopes the new Prime Minister will act in the national interest. More on that a little bit later on. Joining me for the duration, former Transport Minister Jim Fitzpatrick, Labour MP for Poplar and Limehouse, and Immigration Minister James Brokenshire, Conservative MP for Old Bexley and Sidcup. Welcome to you both. And, well, let's start, James. What did you think when you saw the way Boris Johnson was disposed of this week?
Well, it's been quite an extraordinary week with all of the changes that have taken place. I'm supporting Theresa May for the leadership of the Conservative Party to be our next Prime Minister.
So when you saw that happen, when you heard about what happened, when you heard what had happened to Boris Johnson, he was pulling out of the race, what do you think?
Well, Boris has been such a big political figure in the Conservative Party for so long, and I very much hope that he will still have a role to play within Conservative politics.
What did you think when you, that moment
shock.
when he pulled that, yeah?
I think it was quite extraordinary that Boris, having set up in terms of running for the Conservative leadership, suddenly now not to be running, and how things have changed, how so much has changed.
And now
over
that
the
your
course of last
candidate
week.
could win?
Well, we're not taking anything for granted on that, Tim. It's important that we get out to sell out the message of what Theresa will do, the experience she has, how she would be a leader from day one. But it's important that we underline that sense of unity of the party coming together, the country coming together. I believe that Theresa May has all of those qualities, what is needed, but we will need to see what Conservative MPs will say this week. And so it's now that steady approach in underlining the strengths that Theresa has and how I think that she would be the right person.
Jim Fitzpatrick, the next steps for your party?
Well, the ball is very much in Jeremy Corbyn's court. He's lost over 60 of his shadow ministers, including most of his shadow cabinet. He's lost the support of many of his previous supporters within the Parliamentary Labour Party. There seems to be a groundswell outside, which is not as supportive of him as previously.
But, of course, the fortunate thing, of course, is that he is supported by the membership, and that's why he should stay where he is, isn't it?
Well, there is anecdotal evidence that the membership are moving, but whether they're moving enough for him not to win another contest remains to be seen. But the only person who can break the logjam is Jeremy, and he's lost the confidence of the dressing room, if I can use a football analogy. His team won't play for him, so how can he possibly carry on?
But why Barry Gardiner, a fellow London MP who you know well, why he says this has been, an offence against democracy, what you've been doing?
Well, people have to stand on the principles that they think are right. The members of the shadow cabinet and shadow ministers who thought that Jeremy was leading us in the wrong direction, that we couldn't win an election, they've tried for 9 months and ultimately they've said it's just not going to work. And on that basis, they've said we will not be part of it.
Other James, just before we move on, surely the next Prime Minister has to be somebody who voted for Brexit.
No, I think we need to have the right person with the right qualities, and Theresa, I think, has those qualities. She could be Prime Minister from day one.
To win over, let's face it, 17 million people voted for it. The key quality has to have made that decision to lead that battle.
But this is about choosing a Prime Minister. It's not, of course, how we negotiate, how we get the best possible deal for London and for our country is very much at the forefront, but it's also about national security, our place in the world. I think that Theresa May has those qualities to do that, but it's also how she will set up a new separate department led by someone who advocated Brexit, how we can bring that together and I think reunify the country as well.
Making the right decision for London. It's like you've read the script. Let's move on. The Mayor, Sadiq Khan, said this week that Brexit made the case compelling for more powers to be devolved to London. That is, to the Mayor and to the boroughs. He hijacked a Leave slogan and said it was time to take back control. Max McGill has more.
As the petition calling for London to declare independence reached almost 200,000 signatories this week, the Mayor outlined his case for London.
London has to take back control too. Londoners who voted for a different path than the rest of England need more self-determination. We need to control our own destiny, and we need to make our own decisions too.
The Mayor is backing calls to keep all business rate income, stamp duty income and revalue council tax. He also wants to borrow more for infrastructure like transport and also take over suburban railway services. Sadiq Khan has urged the government to move fast on devolution, and he asserts that London cannot afford to hang around for the outcome of EU negotiations.
Well, Gerard Lyons has dropped in to join us too, Chief Economic Advisor, formerly, to Boris Johnson. Welcome to you. And impossible, before we get on to some of the economics and some of the devolution issues, not to talk about the man. What do you feel about what happened to Boris Johnson?
Well, I haven't spoken to Boris since the referendum. As you know, I advise him on economic, financial issues. Obviously, it's disappointing that he's not continued with his campaign. But to be quite honest, policies matter more than personalities. I think Andrea Leadsom is a very good candidate. She brings forward the Brexit case. I was a strong supporter.
Rather than Michael Gove?
In my view, definitely, yes. And I supported the Brexit case. Brexit, in my view, is not only positive for London, but positive for the UK. And in terms of candidates, obviously you asked about Boris. He was a very good mayor of London, but we're in a new situation now. And I think Andrea, personally, is a very good candidate for
Any comment about why Boris Johnson pulled out?
No, I don't have any more information on that than you have.
No.
And obviously the press today, and not only today, is full of that. So,
but aren't you disappointed, given you would have backed him and wanted to see him? Obviously, you helped him a lot in terms of the Leave campaign and supplied a lot of the intellectual ballast. Some of the reports you'd written for him. Are you disappointed that he didn't go ahead and stand?
As I say, I advised Boris on economic, financial issues, and I played a role in terms of the economic case for Brexit. But yeah, at the end of the day, life's more than personalities. Obviously, I think he would have done very well. But as I say, I think there are other good candidates as well. But coming back to your question, am I disappointed? I think the most important thing here now is that the country has voted for Brexit. Obviously, one needs to be mindful of the fact that 48% of people voted to remain.
Yeah.
But I think we need to actually move forward, leave the European Union. I personally think the best way to help us is to actually invoke Article 50 to make it quite clear that we are not going to try and reverse this decision.
When? Soon, immediately?
Well, I think the challenge is that in the near term, we need to have political stability and clarity about policy. Obviously, we can't have political stability until either the new Prime Minister or the Leader of the Opposition are fully in place. I would like personally to see that all speeded up, but that's not possible, it seems. But once we have political stability, then we can start to implement sensible policies, not just for London. Obviously, this is a London programme, but this is about the United Kingdom.
The major report you did for Boris Johnson a couple of years ago made clear that obviously the best option would be to stay in the EU as long as it was reformed. And the second best option was obviously that you could come out and then really negotiate very well subsequently. Okay. Do you still stick by that?
Well, to be quite clear, in terms of the scenarios, I stress that leaving would be an economic shock, and indeed the Treasury Select Committee referred to my comments in their report. Yeah. And I said if one looked at the scenarios, the best two scenarios by a long way whether to either be in the truly reformed European Union or to be global with Brexit. And both of those were considerably better than staying in an unreformed EU.
And you did talk about the shock, and you did put a timescale. You said you expect maybe there to be turbulence for a couple of years. Have you been surprised by the immediate shocks that there have been after the decision?
Well, actually, I didn't say there would be turbulence for a couple of years. What I made clear was that it depends on the policies chosen. And I think, coming back to reiterating an earlier point, we need to have sensible policies being chosen. So life and the economic outlook depends on the interaction between the economic fundamentals, policy and confidence. The fundamentals in the UK showed the economy already losing momentum before this referendum. Also, the G7 countries in Japan 6 weeks ago highlighting the need for the global economy to have another policy boost. The policy side, clearly we need the right policies, and confidence is a difficult one. What's interesting, I think, is that on Friday the Chancellor, correctly in my view, sort of changed his fiscal stance. We need to have a lot more infrastructure spending. The UK government can borrow next to nothing, and we should be investing longer term for the infrastructure, not just for London.
And James, do you agree that actually the signals, I mean, we might get a little bit of short-term turbulence, but actually what was the fuss about? We will restore confidence eventually with the right leader in place and so on, with political stability.
Well, I think that is now the key objective, that we do move forward, and that we've seen, I think,
it was always going to be the objective, really. Leave was never going to be that much of a problem.
I think that, you know, from my point of view, I wasn't arguing that the sky would fall in, nor was Theresa May, who I'm supporting, saying that either. It is now giving that sense of confidence and stability, getting the right policies. From my perspective, I think we shouldn't just rush to invoke Article 50. I think it's important that we have a clear approach set out in terms of our negotiating mandate, so that we're able to go in clearly and get the best possible deal. That's why I think it's right not to trigger that, say, before the end of this year. But it is now about how we get that best possible deal for the city, for London, on passporting of financial services, on the best possible access for goods and services to the single market. And that, I think, is the approach that we need to be very clear on.
And Jim Fitzpatrick, no signals at all that London can't get, a good deal in this new world?
Well, Sadiq has outlined this week that London obviously has a special place within the UK economy. It needs special arrangements, and he's already had a meeting with Oliver Litwin. He's already laid out a case for greater devolution of powers to the Mayor of London and to London as an entity. People are naturally very worried, and we need the reassurance of, as Gerard says, political stability, and that's not going to happen very soon, but hopefully as quickly as possible. To be honest, we need an effective opposition as well to keep the government on their toes, to hold them to account, and we're not going to do that anytime soon with the way that the Labour leadership is acting.
Was there any sense of contradiction for you? I think this is what you were saying this week in Sadiq Khan asking for more powers and more devolution to London, given that you think, his support for the EU was a centralising body, etc.
Yeah, I was on the panel just after the Mayor spoke, and I thought he gave a very good speech, but I thought there was a big contradiction in terms. He was talking about the need to be very much in the EU. And we have to remember, over the last decade, the European Union has become centralising, controlling, regulating. But at the same time, the Mayor said devolve more powers to London.
But
which was
isn't that
something
the point, though? Because of the EU decision, it now has made that case even more for the devolution.
Yeah, basically, we have decided to leave the European Union. I think that's in the best long-term interest of London and the whole country, despite the near-term uncertainty. But what the Mayor said this week was something that Boris Johnson, when he was Mayor, was pushing for the last couple of years. And this is sensible, to have devolving more powers, not just to London, but across the whole country. Okay. Better for accountability, transparency, and also if the Prime Minister and Chancellor allow more infrastructure spending.
Brilliant.
That's a plus.
Let's move on. Stay with us. Just over 1 million EU nationals account for 12% of the capital's population. What's the future hold for them? Raphael Sheridan has this.
Perhaps overlooked amidst the sound and fury of the battles fought over the referendum, the decision to leave the European Union has cast doubt over the future of EU nationals living in the capital. Those nationals seeking clarity might feel less than assured by Theresa May's speech on Thursday as she launched her campaign to become the next Prime Minister, indicating that the legal status of EU nationals will at some point be on the table for negotiation.
And until a new legal agreement is reached with the EU, which will not happen for some time, the legal status of British nationals living or working in Europe will not change, and neither will the status of EU nationals in Britain.
Cause for disquiet, then, for the EU national community here in the capital. We showed a few of them Theresa May's speech.
Actually, a colleague of mine at work, she came to work the other day and she said her kids came back from school saying that asking Mum that, are we going to be deported? Do we have to leave the country now? What's going to happen? She said, no, don't worry, we're not leaving, but after this statement, who knows?
I feel that the morning after the referendum results, I felt it was a different city. Suddenly I'm looking over my shoulder for no reason, or maybe I do have a reason. It's kind of a primal instinct now to just think about looking at people in the bus and think, oh, is that 50% in this bus voted for me to get out of this bus?
The UK has yet to begin negotiations to leave the EU, leaving the fate of EU nationals here very much in limbo.
Gerard, let's ask you first, kind of briefly, would London survive without its EU workforce?
Well, I think they are going to stay. But in terms of London, 38% of the London economy or the London population is international. It's on a par with New York, Singapore, other international financial centres. 1 in 8 people in the finance industry are Europeans from outside the UK. So they are important, and hence the focus on the points-based migration system.
Jim Fitzpatrick, freedom of movement now, that's up for grabs. You have to reconsider your policy on migration as well.
Well, it's clearly an issue, and even Jeremy Corbyn seems to have accepted that. But the attacks on European citizens and on people who are brown or black, which have happened since Brexit, are completely outrageous. And it's great that the government has said they're going to clamp down on that. Yep. We need to see the police taking greater action, because these people have been working here. They're helping London be as successful as it is, and they need those reassurances and those safeguards.
But will EU citizens or European citizens or EU citizens after EU, will they be able to stay here?
Well, there is no change at the moment whilst we remain in the European Union, and it's important that as part of those negotiations we look for guarantees for those EU citizens who are here, those who are working, those who are contributing, and equally for British citizens overseas.
So we will not, but just to concentrate on the ones that are going to be here, we cannot guarantee. We heard some concerns in the film there, and I didn't hear it clarified by Theresa May on Robert Peston this morning. Can you guarantee that all the people from the EU who are here now will be able to stay here for as long as they like?
I think it's important that we seek those guarantees as part of the negotiation, but Jim's point is absolutely right. The attacks that we've seen, some of the awful incidents that have taken place are utterly unacceptable, don't represent our capital city, don't represent our country.
But you accept you cannot guarantee that, and you cannot guarantee that the people here that have made their careers, their lives, contributed their taxes and whatever, they won't be able to stay here.
I think it's important that we have this as a core part of the negotiation to get that assurance, because as Gerald has said, it is such an important part of our economy, around 60,000 people in the care sector, 50,000 people in the NHS. We need to look at that assurance so that people can continue to contribute in that way.
You're shaking your head, Jim Fitzpatrick, but no party will be able to guarantee that now.
Well, the difficulty is that the mixed signals that the government are sending with the Brexit vote last week, it's given licence to the racists in the community to think it's a field day on foreign people. We need the assurances. We need to make sure that the government acts to clamp down on people who are attacking those with a different accent or a different colour.
And that is the firm response that the police are giving, the firm message that this government is giving. It is utterly unacceptable.
Running out of time. Sorry, can't come back to you for any more. Gerard, thanks very much indeed for coming. First it was meant to be last autumn, then Christmas, then it was this summer. Now it's slipped until at least October. No one seems to want to have to make this decision on airport expansion, but the chair of the commission which recommended a third runway at Heathrow, and as a second preference another runway at Gatwick, has told us he thinks the new Prime Minister, whoever that is, will come at it with an open mind and in the national interest.
A new campaign to challenge plans for Heathrow Airport gets underway tonight. Tim Donovan has the story.
Just a small airfield in the middle of acres of farmland. This was pre-war Heathrow.
People have been making almost exactly the same news report about Heathrow expansion for decades. There's a map of the new runway, a visit to a potentially blighted village, assurances from airport bosses.
We said we didn't think another runway was necessary in the southeast until the year 2016, providing we're allowed to build Terminal 5.
The latest push for a third runway began exactly 1 year and 2 days ago, when the government's Airport Commission reported. Chaired by the economist Sir Howard Davis, he plumped for Heathrow.
We have concluded that the northwest runway at Heathrow is the best option.
But 12 months on, he told us that he was disappointed with the speed of progress.
I did expect a decision before now. They said they needed to look at our evidence and our analysis, which is quite reasonable, but that they would make a decision in the autumn. That's the autumn of 2015.
The decision came eventually in December and opted for indecision. More work was needed, the government said, on air quality impacts. But then, this week, more delay. The government said it would now be down to the next Prime Minister to make a decision. News which dropped just hours before this meeting from the lobbying group Let Britain Fly.
Now, on every seat here, they've given away a packet of fudge, which says, stop fudging a decision on airport expansion. It's fair to say that a lot of people here think that's exactly what the government have just done.
I'm not surprised, but it's bad news for the British economy. Now more than ever, we need decisions to go ahead on investment in infrastructure.
But the news kept coming. After the meeting, this.
I have concluded that person cannot be me.
Along with the former mayor's prime ministerial ambitions, surely went any hope of this. His idea for an airport in the Thames estuary, sometimes dubbed Boris Island.
Now, whether building a new airport in the Thames estuary was a good idea or not, you can't take it away from Boris Johnson. He was certainly very clear in his enthusiasm for the idea. What's much less clear is where the people who are still in the race to be the Conservative leader stand on the issue.
Both Theresa May and Michael Gove have constituencies near Heathrow and have, in the past, expressed concerns about its noise. So, does that mean that they would oppose a third runway?
Neither Theresa May nor Michael Gove were involved in the Cabinet Committee which was looking at these options, and I'm not aware that they have made any firm commitment either for or against. They both have struck me when I've met them as being people who are analytical, who will look at the pros and cons in a way that is imbued with the national interest, if you like, rather than their local interest.
But nevertheless, it seemed to some that it was a good week for alternatives to a Heathrow airport, namely building a second runway at Gatwick.
Yes, a very good week for Gatwick. I mean, in our view, we've always had a very strong case, and we think today our case is probably as strong as it's ever been. So yeah, very good week for us.
The provision of a third airport for London is no problem, according to...
For half a century, people have struggled with how to build extra airport capacity here in the southeast. Could it be that it's so difficult, the closest a new runway ever gets to being built is pretty much just a map drawing on a news report?
James, what will you be advising Theresa May to do if it is she getting to make a decision?
Well, let's just look at the evidence that will come through. It's important that we get the air quality information that the Secretary of State has said. Equally, the airport operators are saying that they will set up more detail as to how they would provide financial compensation and also the links to other airports as well. And so I think it's about getting this decision right. I can understand why this decision has been deferred. It doesn't affect the long-term timescale, but rather it is better that whomever is the next Prime Minister has that information to their fingertips and can make that decision.
Where do you think, personally? Have you expressed a view?
I've not expressed a view. I too want to look at the evidence to see what that says, what that points to, knowing that for so many people the air quality information is really essential to the conclusion on this.
Clarify for us, because Theresa May has raised issues around the noise, but I've always understood that she was against expansion at Heathrow. Do you know if that's the case?
I've never had a conversation with her about this, and so I couldn't say. You'd have to ask her in terms of her views. But it's about looking at the evidence coldly, carefully, the economic analysis, as well as some of these environmental impacts, so that we get the right decision. And yes, we're seeing a further deferral, but that doesn't have an overall impact. We need to get that right choice.
You're clearer, Jim, aren't you? You always supported it in the past, and you still back it now?
Yeah, indeed, we had a 2003 white paper which recommended it. I was the aviation minister in 2008 when the consultation. Government opposed it at the 2010 general election, realised they'd made a mistake by 2012, set up a Davis Commission, said there'd be an answer by 2015, then there'd be an answer after the election, then there'd be an answer by January. Now it's the summer.
And then your mayor, Sadiq Khan, decided he didn't back it after all, and it was Labour confusion as well.
Given the Brexit result, one of the real challenges is connectivity to the rest of the world, and our trading partners, Paris, Madrid, Berlin, All of our major competitors have 4 or 6 runway airports. Dubai's just built a 6 runway airport. Istanbul, who suffered the tragedy last week, has just built a 6 runway airport. We are dithering and we need this sorted. And it's private sector investment. Heathrow and Gatwick, it's not taxpayers' money. Let both airports go on and do the job, which is to sell their business to their customers.
OK, well, you've heard him loud and clear there, James. You'll be reporting that back, I hope, to Theresa May.
Well, it's for the government now to make that decision.
Got to go all over. Thanks very much. Andrew, back to you.
Let's return to Labour's troubles now. We're joined from Hull by the former Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, John Prescott. John Prescott, earlier in this programme, Barry Gardiner, member of the Shadow Cabinet, said that what was needed was an honest broker to resolve this issue between Mr Corbyn and the Parliamentary Party and the party in the country. He named you as a potential honest broker. Are you up for it?
Well, I'm amazed. You know, it twists and turns every 24 hours. And all of a sudden, when I turn on your programme, Andrew, yeah, I'm told I'm to be the honest broker. Listen, there's no doubt that I believe and love my party, the Labour Party. I would always do whatever was helpful. But let me say, simply because I had a few negotiating words with Gordon and Tony, it's not an easy proposition. You have to have the will. And the will this time must be, can we avoid the disaster we're heading to of the talk of civil war and separate parties? You can't have that. We must do everything to stop it.
So do I take that that's a no to being honest broker, or a maybe?
You can take nothing from it, basically. Oh. I'm just amazed to hear it. And I'm only John Prescott. Nobody's approached me. Can you do anything? It wouldn't be just one person. It'd have to be a group of people thinking about how you deal with the real problems. The MPs have concerns about selections, which they've been threatened with. There is concern about what our negotiating positions are going to be, and the concern expressed about the leadership. I have to say, when I listen to the programmes again, Neil Kinnock and others, I mean, whether you can go ahead without an election. I'm a believer, and I fought hard for one member, one vote to involve the ordinary members. That's why I persuaded people to vote for Jeremy, let the party make the decision. I didn't vote for him. I didn't think he was the leader that I particularly wanted, but the party did speak. And what has changed now is one member, one vote. The Parliamentary Party has its position. It used to originally elect the leader. We changed that. We went out to the members. And surely, if you want an election, then use the proper procedure, get the names of the MP for the nominations, and have the election, for God's sake. I hope we don't have it. I hope Angela and Owen don't go into election, because that will take the fight much nearer to a kind of civil war.
Let me ask you this, though. If Mr Corbyn is challenged, is it your view that as the incumbent, as the existing leader of the Labour Party, he has a right to be on the ballot paper automatically?
Well, I hear what the lawyers say about that. I haven't read the papers, but what I say this: if you want to challenge the leader of the party, then you get the names of the MPs, you get a nomination list, and you have a vote. That's the way to do it.
I'm simply trying to work out, would it not be fair, since he's the incumbent, shouldn't he therefore, and if he's being challenged, he hasn't stepped down, he hasn't resigned, he's being challenged in the process you're outlining, whatever the lawyers say, John Prescott, would he not have a right to be on the ballot paper?
Well, I believe if he could get sufficient names from the PLP, which is the rule under our situation, then he has title to be on it. Now, the argument as to whether, because he was the leader before, is really a legal one. Personally, if you're going to have an election, and I hope we don't, if you're going to have an election, that's the only way you can sort it out.
So
but
he would
it will
still
leave
need
a
to
very bitter, divided party.
He would still need to get the names as well, then? He wouldn't have an automatic right?
Oh, yes. If I say that's the rules that we have, you have to get the names. But isn't it funny? Why haven't the names been put up before now? What happened on this occasion was they hoped you could shake him down. They thought he would resign voluntarily. And I think a lot of MPs were convinced that that was the road forward. Well, whether it was right or wrong, it hasn't turned out that way, and the man intends to stand in the election. In my view, follow the processes of the party and get the names of supporters to enter the list.
If he's not challenged and remains as leader of the Labour Party, what gives you hope? What evidence is there that he'll get better at the job?
Well, if you were to take from January, remember I didn't vote for Jeremy for some of these reasons, but Jeremy, from when he started to now, he has been improving. But I do accept a lot of people are not convinced. He doesn't have the passion that sometimes you need. I scream and shout, as you know, you, Andrew, from time to time. They want a passion, but they don't doubt he believes in what he's saying. But a leader's got to reach across the party. I don't think Jeremy's done that. Let's face it, there are people in the party who've declared war on him and not joined his cabinet from the first day of his election. Now, what we need to do is he's got to improve. The party's got to recognise the road it's embarked upon, or the PLP, and we need to prevent the civil war. It will be disastrous for us. I sat in the Labour Party when it was the SDP. It put us out for 18 years. Is that what we want again? Is that our answer to our people who are screaming out to tackle this Tory government, that we're getting all constitutional? Follow the Constitution. Have an election if we have to. I prefer we don't have it, quite frankly, and I hope Angela and Owen will not stand. I tried to advise a week ago, could we take a little bit more time to think about it? And I think most MPs and all of us should go away over the holiday, think about it, and come back and remember the party, whole the party, wants us to present a good case against this horrible Tory government, which won't change much under May, and our people will suffer. We can't stand on the side wringing our hands. Get together. That's what the party wants, and that's what I want.
I understand that rallying call, but if there isn't an election, or if there is, but Mr. Corbyn remains a leader, surely the situation is a leader who doesn't have the confidence of 80% of the parliamentary party. That's not sustainable, is it? Something has to give.
I fully understand that, and it's a very proper question. I do tend to feel, though, listening to all the arguments for the last few weeks and in the PLP, and I've been attending them for about 50 years, and listening to those arguments, I wonder if every MP would feel exactly the same if we thought we're embarked upon a new party, they now talk a new PLP party, isolating itself from the membership. If they do that, I wonder whether you'd keep the same vote. People have got to look at their sales, particularly MPs now, and say, let us get behind the guy if that's the case, or get rid of him, but get rid of him the proper way. Most of them thought he would just resign. It hasn't happened that way, so let's think through the consequences and avoid that civil war and deserting our own people in fighting against Tories.
Now, you wrote this morning that the last time Labour split, the Gang of Four, the 1980s, you ended up in opposition for 18 years. It is possible, when you look at the situation at the moment, that split or unsplit, if things continue the way they are, you'll be in opposition for 18 years.
I think that would be a distinct possibility. The real deal, you got to deal with the threats that were made and the misconceptions people had. They assumed, many in the PLP, that this man should go. OK, that's right, they've expressed their opinion about the confidence in him, but they thought he'd just go quietly. That hasn't happened. And if you go on along this road and have another election, we are embarking upon those who are already talking about a separate PLP party, separating it off from the members. God blimey, think twice before you go that road. And we now know there'll be 4 years before the next election. Let's be a bit more common sense and remember it's a whole party, not a bit of it.
All right. And one final question, John Prescott. I'm not wishing to make you more gloomy than you might be. Isn't there the chance that things may get worse before they get better? We've got the Chilcot report coming out on Wednesday, and we're being told that a number of leading Labour people, perhaps even Mr Corbyn himself, will brand Tony Blair as a war criminal. That can only make things worse rather than better, can't it?
I absolutely agree. Whatever they come out and whether they say they do what they say they're going to do, it will make it worse. That's more the reason why bitter division within the PLP, talking about different parties, can only be made worse by very angry statements about Iraq. We got it wrong on Iraq. Most people now recognise that, and terrible price was paid for it. Let Chilcot said who make those decisions, and I can't absolve myself from that. I sat in that cabinet. We can have a proper debate, but keep it less personal. Let's debate it and probably learn from the lessons and avoid such a terrible situation, though frankly we have been in other wars since then, which is still that kind of feeling prevailing.
All right, John Prescott, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
John Prescott there. Helen, what's happening?
Well, the one thing I was missing there was really a plan for what happens next. I think it's extremely unlikely that people who've exited the shadow cabinet are going to go back into it. So really you have to, at this point, say, if you are a Jeremy Corbyn supporter, if you voted for Jeremy Corbyn, what do you want out of this? If you accept that there is really no way. And that's what I think the negotiations are now happening in the party about, could perhaps you have an automatic place on the next ballot, or would you have an agreement that someone, say, like Clive Lewis, would get onto the next ballot?
But that would require Jeremy Corbyn to stand down.
Yeah, so I think the calculation really is, the deadlock is that if Corbyn stands again, it looks like he would win again with the members, and there would be such a lot of hatred at the idea of anybody who ran directly against him, that probably would splinter the party.
Chris Bryant was saying that he didn't think it was a shoo-in or necessarily that he would win with the members again.
Well, that's because there's polling out this week that shows that the support for Corbyn has slid backward. And I think the other thing is, actually, one of the things that the polls did was put him against all the likely challengers, and he beat all of them. But there was definitely a sense in the vote last time. There were some people who really wanted Jeremy Corbyn, really wanted Jeremy Corbyn's policies. There were some people who just didn't like any of the others and wanted to have a go at something different. And if there were a plausible somebody offering a different option that wasn't Corbyn, they might therefore go for that person.
It was interesting that John Prescott, though, still said that even if you're the incumbent, you need to get the requisite number of MPs.
Controversial. For that in itself is hugely debated at the moment and will almost certainly end up going to the courts before a Labour leadership.
That's all Labour needs now, is the lawyers to get involved.
But I think it's going to inevitably at some stage. I mean, for me, this is still a rock and a hard place, and quite frankly, whether it's Clive Lewis or John McDonnell rather than Jeremy Corbyn versus Andrew Eagle or Vivek, whoever it is, these are two tribes now are so far away from each other. The rubber band of any political party has broken. And we are now looking at two political parties eventually. It may take 3 months, it may take 3 years, but I just cannot see how those two wings now can reconcile themselves with the state of the membership as it also is.
But if Tom's right, the key battle then is who takes possession of the Labour brand.
Absolutely.
Because the Labour brand is still very powerful. In some ways, as a brand, it is still more powerful than the Conservative brand. And who has that brand gets almost automatically at least 20% of the votes. That kind of just comes with the name.
It does, but what is the brand anymore? And I suppose that's what goes to the heart of what this debate is about. I think there's a couple of other points. I thought all credit to John Prescott for at least acknowledging that if this goes on, Labour could be out for another 18 years. He acknowledged that. But the other thing is, what about these 40 MPs who are propping up Corbyn at the moment? I don't think enough attention and scrutiny is being given to them and their position, because at the end of the day, if they disappeared, if they hemorrhaged away from Corbyn, then he'd have nobody left. And I can't understand why senior figures, very experienced parliamentarians like Andy Burnham, are still helping him.
Well, except we thought they had tried to resign. And that was clearly the point that Chris Bryant was making. Several of them, including Andy Burnham, Clive Lewis apparently, tried very hard to resign last week or tell Jeremy Corbyn they would if he didn't go. But they are now incapable of resigning because he won't see them.
But there's a parallel to kind of Article 50. This is Jeremy Corbyn's own Article 50, right? Which is that as soon as he says he's standing down, he's lost a huge amount of bargaining ability. At the moment, for as long as he sticks it out, he can try and, in some sense, set the terms of his departure. And I think that's where the conversation might move this week.
But what is the mood on the left of the Labour Party? Is it to stick it out with Jeremy Corbyn, or is it to accept that that's not working and get someone else from a more credible left-wing leader of the Labour Party into place?
My sense is that it's fracturing. It's certainly not the solid way that it was, but I think what you are going to end up with is a rump of people who just want Jeremy Corbyn. They don't care about anything else. It is Corbyn. They joined the party to vote for Corbyn, and they will leave it when he goes. You know, you see people writing those articles. But there is a much bigger group of people who want somebody, say, like of a Lisa Nandy type quality. You know, they want somebody who they feel is authentically left-wing, who has those values, but they're not wedded to it being Corbyn or Corbyn's anointed heir. And that's where I think that is what's beginning to change in the last 2 weeks, is that there has been certain bleeding away of support from Corbyn himself.
But also the extent to which Corbyn is being propped up by 2 or 3 key figures in his inner circle. I mean, I'm increasingly hearing, and I don't know whether you are as well, Helen, that actually the man himself wants to go, but he is being utterly forced to stay there.
Well, there were some stories to that effect, but do we know if they're true or not?
My understanding is that is absolutely true, because
that he wanted to go.
That he feels that he's ready to go, but people around him are saying, look, if you go, then our experiment about this part of the party being in charge will be utterly destroyed. You know, after you, the deluge, basically.
Do you agree with that?
I wonder. to be
Yeah.
honest. I mean, I think if,
I
you know,
wonder
if you're the
too.
leader of a political party and you want to go, you go.
Yeah.
And all your mates in the world, your Seamus Mills, your John McDonnells, you say, look, I've had enough of this. I'm being humiliated. I'm out the door. Now, every time Jeremy Corbyn turns up at a rally in Parliament Square where Momentum have got 2,000 or 3,000 people, or Highbury Fields yesterday where there's another 2,000 or 3,000 screaming for him, it makes him feel good and it gives him hope again. It makes him think, well, actually, I know it's looking pretty bad, but there's still people out there who love me and I've got some hope.
But I think there is also a genuinely principled thing, which is that he feels he was elected by a group of people who didn't have their say otherwise, that weren't represented by the Labour Party as it was, and he feels a sense of responsibility to them to carry on.
And Chilcot coming out on Wednesday morning in this internal Labour dynamic can only make it worse.
Well, absolutely. And of course, there is a lot of speculation at Westminster that Jeremy Corbyn is only holding on till then so that he can stand up in the House of Commons and say that Tony Blair should be tried for war crimes. So, you know, possibly that is what he wants. He wants his big moment and he will disappear after that.
Or he may get reinvigorated by it all.
Well, this is the thing I find fascinating, is all the people who are now sort of saying, well, Jeremy Corbyn deserves the loyalty of his MPs. When Tony Blair was the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn was the official opposition to Tony Blair within his own party. This is not an unprecedented situation.
I'm not sure Chilcot's going to move the weather too much. I mean, what are we going to learn that we didn't really know that will affect the Labour Party? That Tony Blair got it badly wrong with the rest of his cabinet?
No, but,
we kind of
but there
knew
are
that.
zealots on both sides who will want to fight this out.
They will, and they'll claim...
Whether we learn anything or not is another matter. It is, I would suggest, fuel on the Labour fire.
But it doesn't change the market. It doesn't move the positions. Everything that we kind of know will be confirmed, and we will be left with where we were. Maybe not on Thursday, but by Friday morning.
But if the leader of the opposition, the Labour opposition, calls on a former Labour Prime Minister to be treated as a war criminal, that's a story in anybody's books.
I do think that is one of the things that is keeping, as Tom said, this Labour Party divide, is whether or not they can reconcile over Tony Blair. Can you accept that he made mistakes, he did things that you like? No, actually, people are in one camp or the other at the moment.
We shall leave it there. Thank you for now. But watch this space. Thanks to all my guests. The Daily Politics is on all next week on BBC Two, a little earlier, I think, because of Wimbledon, with PMQs on Wednesday. I'm back here next Sunday at 11 o'clock, our usual time on BBC One. Because if it's Sunday, it's the Sunday Politics.